If superhero stories are our modern mythology, then there isn't a character more central to these myths than Superman. From his triumphant arrival in 1938, the Man of Steel has had thousands of depictions across comics, radio, television, and film, each giving their own spin on the hero, the world he fights for, and the legacy he's meant to represent. And it's no surprise that with all of these depictions reaching different audiences over the years, there's also been a lot of controversy over how the hero should be depicted. Even at the time of this video, Superman is in a prominent but shaky place, with James Gunn's new film debuting a fresh but classic take on the character while setting up the freshly rebooted DC universe. But if you ask me, the real strength of these characters is their ability to grow and change across each new adaptation, as each creator does their part to build on these stories. And across the near century of Superman adaptations, few are as celebrated as Fleischer Studios' animated shorts, which ran from 1941 through 1943 and gave The Last Son of Krypton his first ever debut on film. But how did the studio end up making this adaptation? What influences and techniques did they use to craft this version of Superman? And how do the themes of these shorts continue to shape the character today? Join me as I explore the origins and legacy of Fleischer Studios' Superman, the series that changed the Man of Steel and the medium of animation forever. Nowadays, Superman is practically synonymous with the very idea of superheroes, with elements of his character, stories, and iconography becoming so iconic that they influenced basically every character that came after, either copying or subverting the archetype he helped build. But the stoic, Samson-esque champion of the oppressed didn't arrive fully formed. In fact, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster's first attempt at the character in 1933 was cast as more of a tragic villain, using his ill-gotten psychic powers to get revenge on the world. And though the story didn't sell well, the duo kept iterating on their concept of the Superman, debuting another version in Consolidated Publishing's Detective Dan comic books. Unfortunately, this second attempt also failed to sell, with Consolidated pulling their support after Detective Dan failed to catch on, leaving the duo so devastated by the experience that they destroyed all traces of the book. Siegel and Shuster would spend most of the 30s working on comics at national periodicals, finding success on titles like Bart Reagan's Spy and the anthology Detective Comics, which featured a super strong detective named Slam Bradley. It also featured a lot of racist caricatures, because comics were just sort of like that back then. But these early successes gave Siegel and Shuster the push they needed for one more chance at revamping Superman, which debuted in 1938's Action Comics #1. Now sporting a cosmic immigrant backstory, sensational new powers, a mild-mannered alter ego, and an incredibly dynamic cast of characters, the duo's new hero became instantly iconic, taking over the Action Comics title and gaining both a solo book and a newspaper strip by 1939. After National pressured Siegel and Shuster to sell them ownership for a paltry $130, of course. Not surprisingly, Superman's popularity would also take him far beyond the world of comics, beginning with 1940's The Adventures of Superman radio show. And while the program built its own cultural legacy, running for 11 years and combating the real-world actions of the KKK, something I talked about in another video, Superman's owners at National were also eager to bring the character to film, specifically through animation. And here's where Fleischer Studios enters the picture. Founded in 1929 by Max and Dave Fleischer, and primarily known for its work on cartoons like Betty Boop and Popeye the Sailor, the studio quickly built an audience through its focus on adult themes and its numerous innovations in the medium, cementing its reputation as the main competitor to Walt Disney Productions through the 30s. But despite its massive success, the studio was also constantly plagued by behind-the-scenes chaos. The runaway success of the Popeye cartoons led to a period of rapid expansion to keep up with demand, and the resulting production speed-ups and management problems resulted in a 5-month labor strike in 1937, a strike so bad that the studio relocated to Miami, Florida while it was still in production on its first feature film, 1941's Gulliver's Travels. Long story short, they had a lot going on. So much so that when the studio's distributor Paramount approached them to produce the series, the Fleischers demanded a budget of $100,000 per episode, hoping to discourage them. Just for reference, that's about $1.6 million today. But instead of withdrawing, Paramount kept negotiating, eventually settling on a deal of $50,000 for the first short and $30,000 for subsequent episodes. And with these absurdly massive budgets came another series of sweeping changes for the studio. Up till 1941, animation had been mostly used for comedy, dominated by Disney's family-friendly Mickey Mouse shorts and their many imitators at Warner Bros., MGM, and Paramount. This generally lighter tone and the major overlap between animation and comic artists also led to the popularity of rubber hose animation, a style of cartooning that avoided realism in favor of curved, bouncy motion. But through Superman, the Fleischers saw the opportunity to build something new in the field of animation. Pulpy, dramatic stories, more defined, human characters, and a level of realism unlike anything the industry had seen before. Recognizing the gap between the studio's current output and the style they wanted, Max Fleischer started hosting sketch classes to train their animators and assistants, even involving Superman co-creator Joe Shuster to help draw model sheets that matched the hero's comic counterpart. It's also worth noting that Max was a part-time inventor and used several of his experiments to help bring Superman to life on screen. The most famous of these inventions, dubbed the rotoscope, helped to create a more lifelike sense of movement for animated characters, with Max photographing bodybuilder Carl Krauser and animating over the footage frame by frame. And after Fleischer's patent on it expired in 1934, the rotoscope would go on to revolutionize filmmaking, used by fellow animators like Ralph Bakshi and Don Bluth, as well as countless special effects in live-action film. Reflecting on these technologies in his book, The Inventions of Max Fleischer, author Ray Pointer states, "Motion pictures were a new medium that had only been around less than 20 years when Max came in. During that period, there was a lot of experimentation and finding of a common standard. Your place in the business was often based on having a unique gimmick that gave you a brand. So most of Max's inventions were developed to create a uniqueness to his films, making them identifiable among the competition. Seeing the finished product, it seems easy to take it for granted because it all worked so well. But the fact is that all of these things are the result of a natural intellectual process. All of the things that made Fleischer animation so special had to be invented. It was the works of the great pioneers who laid the foundation, and Max Fleischer was one of those pioneers." Of course, all this innovation and learning on the fly had a cost. Originally promised as a December 1940 release, Superman's first entry ballooned to twice the schedule of a typical Fleischer project, with about 90 artists, most of whom were uncredited, producing close to 1 million illustrations over 7 months, all by hand. Finally premiering in September of 1941, the short, fittingly titled Superman, acts as an introduction to the character, quickly walking viewers through his origins before setting the hero and his love interest/rival Lois Lane against a mad scientist and his all-powerful electrothanasia ray. Directed by Dave Fleischer, written by Seymour Kneidl and Isidore Sparber, animated by Steve Muffatti and Frank Onrez, and scored by Sammy Timberg, this first short was instrumental in setting both the tone and story template for the rest of the series, establishing the short's antagonist, having Lois chase the story to end up in peril, following Clark as he transforms into Superman, and having the hero best the threat and save Lois through a new feat of incredible power. Given the episodic, iterative nature of early comics, Superman feels like the perfect translation for the Man of Steel's adventures. While the short keeps the comic's basic beats and setup intact, the fluidity of animation also let the studio heighten the comic's grounded scope into something grand and operatic. Every frame is draped in vibrant color and rich shadows, evoking German expressionist films like Metropolis, get it? And lending an immensity and drama to what's on screen. All beautifully tied together in the short's climax when Superman literally punches back the beam of the scientist's death ray. It's a near-perfect showcase for the uncanny power of animation, with the lifelike detail of these characters highlighting the sheer impossibility of Superman's might. Luckily, the studio's ambitions paid off, and Superman was received with just as much popularity as the comics that inspired it, even earning an Oscar nomination for Best Animated Short in 1941. It was a pivotal moment for both the character and the emerging genre he was heralding, forever tying superheroes to the medium of animation, and the Fleischer's impact on the grander myth of Superman would only grow from here. After a lengthy, intricate development and the titanic success that followed, Max and the team at Fleischer quickly threw themselves behind Superman, producing 8 more theatrical shorts between 1941 and 1942, all of which were heavily modeled after the original. This rapid expansion also saw the introduction of an even bigger stable of writers, introducing Bill Turner and Ted Pierce for The Arctic Giant, Carl Meyer for The Bulleteers, Dan Gordon for The Magnetic Telescope, and Jay Morton for Terror on the Midway, with writers returning to assist for each episode. And given the constraints of animation, namely tight deadlines and a demand for increasing quality, it's no surprise that so many classic cartoons are iterative, giving slight variations on a broader concept. You can even see the same model in many of Superman's Golden Age comic adventures, with the hero usually solving different social issues like crime, corruption, or exploitation by beating some sense into the right people. Of course, iterative doesn't mean identical, and I would argue the real appeal of episodic storytelling is seeing just how much you can experiment while still inside a formula. And the good news is, these cartoons have that in spades. While Superman's adventures in print and on the radio were mostly grounded in real-world problems, the Fleischer films pushed the character more into the realm of science fiction, something Max developed a passion for while working as an editor for Popular Science magazine. In place of corrupt businessmen and war profiteers, these new shorts saw the Man of Steel encounter more fantastical threats, like the mechanical monsters thieving automatons, the Bulleteers' souped-up armored car, an incoming asteroid in the Magnetic Telescope, or a reanimated dinosaur in the Arctic Giant, which released a whopping 12 years before the debut of Godzilla. These were interspersed with more natural problems, like a giant rampaging circus ape in Terror on the Midway, or an erupting volcano in, Volcano, giving more variety to the hero's adventures and building on his mythic status by setting his powers against the forces of nature. Even the more familiar elements of Superman and his world are transformed through Fleischer's more filmic twist on the hero. Bud Collyer and Joan Alexander's performances as Clark Kent and Lois Lane, ripped straight from the Superman radio show, are elevated into a friendly, if somewhat pointed, rivalry between the two reporters, cementing the pseudo-love triangle between Clark, Lois, and Superman introduced in Action Comics. There's even a new twist on Collier's famous line,
"This is a job for Superman,"
with every short actually showing the transformation on screen, as Clark ducks into cover while his silhouette slowly gives way to his alter ego, a sequence that would become a staple for the character moving forward. These shorts also build on the contrast between Clark and his alter ego, with Collier delivering most of his dialogue as the reporter, while Superman stays mostly wordless, letting his actions and powers speak for him. In fact, let's talk about that. Each short does a fantastic job at showing Superman's physicality, with Fleischer's rotoscoping giving the character a fluidity and heft during action sequences. But the studio was also instrumental in cementing some of the hero's most iconic abilities. Not only does the short Mechanical Monsters feature one of the first on-screen depictions of X-ray vision, which had a blink-and-you'll-miss-it debut in Action Comics number 11, but it also introduced the character's power of flight, which Max requested after realizing how much time it would take to animate Superman actually leaping tall buildings. While these shorts were just one part of Superman's ever-growing profile, it's impossible to understate the legacy they left on the character and pop culture at large, refining the mythic nature of the hero and building iconography that would inspire its own homages through the decades. But this golden age wouldn't last forever, and Fleischer's meteoric rise on Superman would give way to a sudden and devastating fall. When you look at everything Superman helped accomplish in animation, from the new standards it set in quality, or the many technological innovations it introduced to filmmaking, it's pretty impossible to deny how huge a landmark it was for Fleischer, launching the already established studio into new levels of popularity. But unfortunately, this elevated fame also heightened a lot of the studio's already worsening problems. The first of these occurred when, acquiring funds for Gulliver's Travels and the studio's relocation in 1938, Max Fleischer signed a loan with Paramount, leveraging the studio's entire cartoon library as collateral. It was a decision that Fleischer's son Richard would later refer to in his biography Out of the Inkwell as a monumental, tragic mistake. And though the studio was able to find some financial success through the popularity of Superman and Popeye, everything would change in December of 1941. With the sudden attack on Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces, America immediately entered into World War II, and as a result, completely reshaped its industries to aid the war effort. While Fleischer's competitors at Disney and Warner were able to weather this change, pivoting into wartime propaganda features to keep afloat, the effects of the war were immediate and devastating for Fleischer and Paramount. The studio's second feature film, Mr. Bug Goes to Town, was delayed from December of 1941 to February of 1942, giving Fleischer one of their biggest losses on a project. This financial blow was only worsened by Dave Fleischer's exit from the studio in 1941, resulting from years of growing animosity between him and Max. And as if that wasn't enough, Paramount called in their loan that same year to oust Max from his position, seizing Fleischer's operations and reincorporating as Famous Studios. As Richard Fleischer would state in Out of the Inkwell, it was truly a Kafka-esque situation. The sudden destruction of his beloved studio, a lifetime of work and dreams, gone. And for no reason, not a single word in the contract giving a clue as to why it happened. In addition to its commitments on Popeye and screen songs, Famous would continue producing Superman shorts from 1942 through 43, trying to capitalize on the success of Fleischer's earlier shorts while pivoting into wartime storytelling. And though Famous tried to keep this restructuring under wraps, even keeping the Fleischer name until May of 1942, the difference between the two teams is night and day. I mean, they couldn't even get a decent Jimmy Olsen for these. Now that's a bad sign. Under pressure from Paramount to reduce costs, the studio cut the number of drawings per sequence in half, leading to a very noticeable dip in animation quality. The new shorts also recast both of their leads, replacing Collier and Alexander with Lee Royce and Barbara Willock. And though there aren't many details about why this happened, it pretty much ended the partnership with the Superman radio show, so it definitely didn't help. But maybe the most noticeable changes for the later Superman shorts were made under writers Bill Turner, Carl Meyer, Jay Morton, and Robert Little, who replaced the lighter sci-fi tone of the Fleischer cartoons with a darker mix of pulp, horror, and war stories. A mix that, in my opinion, leaves a pretty bad aftertaste. While Showdown, Destruction Inc., The Mummy Strikes, and The Underground World make great use of grounded crime or fantasy stories, basically transplanting Superman into Doc Savage adventures, the remaining shorts are little more than wartime propaganda, with the grossly named Japatours and Jungle Drums defining their antagonists through racist caricatures, while The 11th Hour follows Superman as he repeatedly destroys the city of Yokohama. Do you know how nationalistic you have to be when Frank Miller parodies you? Of course, this was pretty much the standard messaging for a lot of American animation at the time, but the link between superheroes and wartime propaganda would continue far beyond World War II, with the might makes right agenda of these earlier stories undercutting the transcendent spirit of Superman and his fellow heroes. And to add insult to injury, the studio's re-releases of the shorts erased the Fleischers from the credits, a betrayal that angered Max until he was able to overturn it via a lawsuit he won in 1955. As for Paramount and Famous, they quickly abandoned Superman after his wartime releases failed to draw an audience, which Paramount attributed to the character's waning popularity. Yes, even 4 years after his debut, studios were desperately trying to tell us Superman was irrelevant instead of owning up to the mismanagement of their own productions. While he was able to find animation work on industrial films and smaller projects, Max Fleischer would never return to animated features, later moving into assisted living at the motion picture Country House due to limited means, and passing away in 1972, aged 89. But despite the tragic loss of his studio and his exit from the industry, Max Fleischer's legacy in animation and filmmaking has only grown in the years since his work on Superman. Beginning with Betty Boop's revival through syndication in the 50s, numerous TV and home video releases kept the studio's work alive, until, in 2021, Max's granddaughter Jane founded the Fabulous Fleischer Cartoon Company, focused on the preservation and restoration of the studio's library. Fleischer's innovations have also moved beyond the world of animation, with the rotoscope and its digital descendants becoming industry-standard tools for special effects. And even today, the studio's impact on Superman is still homaged across the character's many appearances, with comics, television, and even live-action adaptations paying tribute to what many see as a foundational take on the hero, one man using his impossible powers to fight for truth and justice. It's a heartwarming reminder that, no matter how commercialized it may become over the decades, art always has been, and always will be, remembered alongside the artists who helped bring it to life. With a new film putting him back in the spotlight, the Man of Steel will continue to grow across every medium, shaped by the artists adding on to his grander myth. And the more he grows as an idea, the more I appreciate the many people who helped define Superman through the years, helping each new generation believe that a man can fly. Thanks for checking out today's video and letting me talk about one of my all-time favorite versions of Superman. I actually first discovered Superman through reruns of these shorts and tapes of the radio show, and watching the character grow into this huge icon over the years, it's been really cool going back to when he first came into being, seeing how many different people worked together to shape the beginnings of the superhero genre. And if you've got any pieces of superhero animation you think are important, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. If you like this video, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Every little bit helps the channel out a lot. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Carol Ann Brenneman, The Comics Cave, and my patrons, who are helping me to grow this channel and continue doing what I love, and hopefully what you love too. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay inspired. You never know what idea might become the next Superman.